Hey guys, good afternoon and welcome back to the Quantum Consciousness coaching platform. And in this particular module, we're going to now examine our advanced level of consciousness in our coaching formula. All right. So by now, you guys should have an understanding or a concept of how things work. So we started off and we talk about the universe, law of attraction, quantum physics. You guys understand how thoughts affects things and how reality is existed on its basis. Okay, and then we moved on to our minds. We talk about our subconscious, our conscious mind, and also that critical faculty part of our mind, or the psychological filter part of our mind. So now you know how each minds work and how limiting beliefs can stop you in the subconscious mind, right? Now we're going to move on to the next level, which is now we're going to work on now what we call the ego. The ego resides in the conscious part of our minds, okay? And this is a huge step for us to manifest our desires. Right, so let's talk about the ego. So I'm going to show you now how you can disengage your ego. Okay, and the first part is, so what is the ego? Okay, the ego is in the conscious mind. Our conscious mind is responsible for rationalizing, analytical. It's the thinking mind. It's always the thinking mind. Okay, our ego basically has a development, and it has a personality that it says that's who you are. It thinks you are, rather. So your ego basically is when you look in the mirror and you see yourself, you see your faults, you see your achievements, you see what you can, you cannot do. That's all attributed to the ego. The ego has pride, it's competitive, has judgment, it's jealousy, it's envy. It's all the negative aspects of what the higher mind is, okay? So what's the purpose of the ego? Basically, and this is all you really need or desire to know about the ego. The ego's primary objective is driven on survival. Okay, what happens is our ego uses our personality to create an identity to survive. So everything that your ego does or interacts is all driven at the core base on survival. So when it uses these things, your ego will use fear, doubt, worry, and all these emotions are driven on the factor to survive. Okay, that's what the ego does. So it uses these emotions. And now an emotion is just your body's response to the mind, to your consciousness, or to the conscious mind. So keep that in mind. The ego uses these attachments or these emotions to drive you. So let's run an experiment right now. I'm going to show you how you are not the mind. See, the biggest trick that our ego plays on us is that it makes us believe that we are it or we exist together. You are not the thinking mind. See guys, once you can detach yourself from the thinking mind, once you stop the mind from thinking, a new level of consciousness rises, a new level of knowledge, intelligence. And this level of knowledge and intelligence, you're now in the realm of the higher mind. This is where you get the answers, the intuition, the nudges, the desires, the dreams, the aspirations, and the guide to create and manifest your desires. This all resides when we shut off the thinking mind. So let's do that now. Let's show you how it works. So what I want you to do, I want you to basically now just close your eyes, okay, and watch the thoughts in your head. Just observe the thoughts. Become an observer. You can just basically pretend you're at the movies and you're in the theater and you're watching the movie and you just go to the back of the movie and just watch your thoughts. Now you're watching your mind. Now select the thought, positive or negative. Isolate that thought. Okay? Now if you get the thought, if it's a negative thought, what I want you to do is to take that negative thought now and turn it into something positive. If it's a positive thought, take that positive thought and add aspects to it to make it better. Okay? Now, I want you to open your eyes and you can get out of this exercise. I have a few questions. My first question is, okay, so who was the observer of your thoughts? Who was the individual, who was that entity observing your thinking mind? Another question then, who was the thinking mind? Who was thinking? Okay? Notice that. Notice how you became separate from the thinking mind when I told you to become the observer. You came out of the mind, yet your mind was still thinking. Congratulations, you've just detached from your ego. See, that's all it is. See, your thinking mind exists, will continue to think, because that higher conscious part of you, known as your higher self or that subconscious mind, can exist beyond it, to show you that you are in control of your own mind. Because when I ask you to isolate a thought and look at the thought, you went in, picked the thought, isolated, and you made it more, or as a negative thought, you turn a negative thought into a positive thought, or you can release the thought. See, this is the biggest trick our ego plays on us. Your ego have you believe that you are part of it. You see, your ego does that because it needs that energy from the higher mind to sustain itself, to continue. It needs an identity. Here's something else about your ego. Your ego, farthest reference point of the conscious mind is only to your past. It can only use things in the past to predict what is called a future. So this is why your mind gives you problems when you try to achieve something you've never done. Because the mind says we can't do it because there's no data bank, there's no memory in my past or in your past that we've done it. Example, if you want to start a business to make $100,000 a year, and throughout your lifetime the most you ever made is $50,000, and you have the drive and desire. Now the ego says nope, you can't do that, okay, because we've never done it. That's the trait of the ego. Also, your ego really truly believes that it exists independently of everyone. It says it's just us. I have to find a way to keep you surviving. Okay, so it doesn't believe you have a mother, father, sister, brother, uncle, aunt. It says it's just us. Okay, what else about the ego? The ego doesn't care about your happiness. The ego is temporary. Okay, all its desires, all its goals are for the temporary stuff. This is why your mind will continue to worry and overthink things, because it feels it must continue to solve the issues. Here's a question I have for you. How can we solve a problem or an issue with the same mind that created it? Cannot do it. It's impossible. So that means we have to go beyond the thinking mind to achieve our goals and our desires. See, this is what you are lacking. You automatically assume, because of a default programming, that your thinking mind is you. And if you can't figure it out, it's just fate. Or that's just how it is. But that's incorrect. You're totally wrong. If you're using the ego, then you're going backwards. You're not creating. The ego puts you in a loop. It wants to keep you there. Okay? So keep that in mind. So now, how do we break free from the ego? Here's the answer. Number one, you must have awareness now that you are not the mind. Number two, you got to use the mind now for what it is. The ego mind is just a tool. The conscious mind is used to give the command to the subconscious mind. The subconscious mind interacts with the higher self interacts with the superconscious, and then brings things in. Law of attraction creates it for you. That's the purpose of your ego. So how do you coax the ego? How do you stop that negative voice? You must speak to it aloud. Okay? How does that work? Well, if you notice, you have two voices as well. You have a voice that you can say inside, you have a voice that you speak outside. And guess what? They both have ears. Outside, you can hear your own voice. Inside as well, you can hear your own voice, but yet inside, you don't have ears inside, right? So think about that. So your inside voice is primarily hijacked or used by the ego. Okay? So that little voice in your head that says you can't do it, you're never going to make it, you're no good, you can't achieve any of your goals and your desires, that's the ego's voice. That's the voice you want to detach. So how do you do this? Anytime your mind says, when you're visualizing your goals, as you learn to visualize, and the mind will come in and try to figure out how it's going to be done, when it's going to be done. This is where you use your outer voice. You must say either, thank you, but it's going to be okay. Outer voice. Or you can say, thank you, but I'll figure it out as I go. Or you can say, thank you, but I only choose to allow thoughts that make me feel good to enter my mind. See that once you use that outer voice, it's a trick about your mind. Your mind cannot focus on two things at one time. So if your ego's there starting trouble and saying all these negative things, and the minute you use your outer voice and say, thank you, but it's going to be okay, that negative thought it was focusing on, it drops it now and focuses on your outer voice. Because your outer voice is unique. Our minds will always run to the newest, to the thing that's very unfamiliar. It's an inquisitive mind. That's the power of your outer voice. So you can either say it under your breath. If you're in public, say it under your breath. You're at home, speak to it, and you will see a huge difference. This is how you start to negate your ego. Okay, what else? How do you distance yourself from the ego? Recognize it as a tool, as the limited mind. Okay? That's how you get out of the ego. Okay? So once you achieve this goal, then you will see things start to change for you. Because now you become separate of it, and now you realize the ego is just the part of me, okay, that is used for conscious thinking. Use the ego for what it's primarily derived for. Practical purposes in your life. Okay, and then keep your mind and keep yourself in the present moment. This present moment is the most important point. It's our point of power. Now what else? There's another aspect to the ego. Our ego uses time as a trap or a trick. Linear time. Now, time does exist, but here's how it exists. It exists in this one-dimensional form known as the present moment of now. See, our brains construct these times into past, future, okay, based on what we were conditioned from the cycles of the sun and the moon and how the earth rotates, and we say night, day, and our brains actually developed a clock that tracks that, okay? But in our facts and reality is only the present moment that exists, okay? We've proven that with the theory of relativity, and time is a conceptual concept of the individual. So keep that in mind. This moment is now. And the biggest tip is how your subconscious works. Your subconscious works in the present moment of now. So that's a key component that you want to remember. Our subconscious mind operates now. It believes everything is existing at once, at the same time. Your ego does not. It cannot accept that. Now, let's move on now to the overthinking part of your mind. Why does your mind keeps overthinking and giving you the negative when it can't solve? Well, here's what happens. Because of its own limited capacity. Your mind is limited. So what happens is when it reaches the brink of, when it cannot figure things out, it reacts with aggression, with impatience, okay, with frustration, with doubt, with fear and worry, because it cannot solve it. Remember, the mind is attempting to do something that it wasn't created to do. It's trying to solve a problem that it created itself. That's what your ego is. That's what it does. It keeps going that way. So you have to recognize that, and you must detach from the ego. So how do you detach from the ego now? You must start now to keep your mind in the present moment. Focus on the task at hand. Keep your thoughts only on what you desire. If you keep your thoughts on only what you desire and nothing opposite, now you place yourself in the present moment. What else? Speak to the mind. Speak, affirm those affirmations I taught you to the ego. That's how you put it in. What is the next clue? The biggest clue is the awareness of it. To recognize that when it says these things to you, that it's not part of you. Look at your ego now as the child mind, the kid mind. It's always there trying to get its own temporary way, right? So remember, most important factor about your ego, it cannot create your reality. All reality is borrowed from the present moment. It takes, creates a past, says this is what you cannot do. So now it is an important lesson here, guys. Now you see how powerful you are. What you can, what you cannot do, what your ego says, it's all an illusion, okay? Because the real you exists independently of that mind and controls all parts of your consciousness. So anything you desire, you can do it. Just don't let the ego affect you, okay? Remember, those emotions you feel are just the body's response to the mind, okay? It's not happening now, okay? Fear is an illusion. The psychological evaluation of fear is an illusion, okay? Fear does not mean any impending or immediate danger, okay? Think about it. When you start to fear something, here's how you realize it. Stop. Look around. Is it happening now? No. See that? That's the trace of the ego. So that's the component to the ego. That's what I want you guys to start to understand. Once you start to detach from the ego and learn its core values, you'll see yourself elevated. And the biggest part is now you release resistance and allow the higher mind to come in. And that's where we'll go next in the next module, the higher mind.